Good afternoon, or perhaps good evening. I'm Eve Bolton, and I'm a member of the Cincinnati School Board, and not only as a member, but also here kind of as the finance chair for the board. And I am very excited to welcome everybody that might be watching, and certainly the folks that are participating here in the hall, to our first budget hall. Will cover, for the most part, revenue, the money coming in and where it comes from and how we make use of that. The next one, at the end of May, we'll be dealing with how we spend it. And indeed, in both instances, we want you to ask questions, give us advice, inform us as to what's the top priorities for you all, and to tell us ways that we might be able to improve our service to the children of Cincinnati Public Schools. I'm very fortunate not only to get to start this, but I'm very fortunate to have the first opportunity, at least right now, to welcome our new superintendent. Superintendent Ironetta Wright is here. She has been on the job for 48 hours. So, and the first thing she's going to be doing besides visiting our children at our schools is visiting with you and talking about fiscal responsibility. Also with us, we have obviously the person that knows all about the money in this district, of our esteemed treasurer, Jennifer Wagner. And then we have also my colleague on the board. I'm thrilled to have her here, and that is Dr. Kareem Moffitt. So the four of us are here to serve your needs and answer your questions. And I'll turn it over now, I believe, to the boss.
Thank you so much, Board Member Bolton. And again, thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you to the ones that are in the hall with us, and for those that are viewing online. So we have a couple of different platforms that we are online tonight, and we do appreciate the fact that you're engaging with us. I would like to offer really recognition to the board and to our treasurer for really having this town hall meeting. This is our first inaugural town hall meeting about the budget, and it is really, really important. It's important because as a school district, we have the responsibility of making sure that we are giving opportunities for our children as we're moving them forward. And one of the ways that we do that is by how we spend our money. How we spend our money. What we spend our money on helps to determine really what we're focusing on. And what we're focusing on really is about what's happening with student achievement. It is our fiscal responsibility to serve all of the children of this district. And we want your input in doing that. So our goal is to make sure that as we're going through the end of this budget cycle, and really as we move into our next year and in moving forward, that we're doing that from hearing your voices. Your voices matter to us as a district. They matter to us as an organization, and your input matters. So it's not just about us and what we think we need to do, but it's really hearing from you. As we talk about engagement, we're talking about engagement really in every single thing that we do. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you to our board, thank you to our finance chair and to our treasurer. Thank you to Dr. Moffitt for making sure that we continue to elevate the voices of our community. When we talk about fiscal responsibility, we do receive a budget. Our treasurer is going to talk to us tonight about how that money is generated for general funds. I am going to come back and talk a little bit about grants and Esser funds, which we have heard so much about. And Esser funds are the things that are just going to fix everything, right? That's one of the things that we hear. But we know that's not the case. There is not a silver bullet. So we really have to put in the tough work to make sure that we move forward. So we will honor time as we go through our time tonight. Please jot down your questions. As you hear the presentation, as you look at the slides, if you have questions, please jot those down. Make sure that you're adding them, you're sending them through the chat so that we are able to get your questions answered. And again, thank you so much for tonight. Now, we're going to open up and we're going to talk about how we are funded. And I am going to go to my partner in this work for how we're funded, and that is Ms. Jen Wagner, who is our treasurer. Jen?
Thank you. Thank you all. So, Rob, if you can bring up the first pie chart for me, please. So this is a graphical representation that's coming up to show how all the income or revenue for the district comes to us, and then we'll drill down into the major parts. So this graph is from fiscal year 22, the current year that we're in, and it shows you the big pie slice, shows you the general fund, and that's 56% of all of our revenues. And the rest is funded by state and federal grants, which are very restrictive in nature for the purpose of the grant and the grantor and their rules. This also shows you that we have $1 billion in revenue for the district. That's not typical for us. We typically have about $700 million a year, but Esser gave us a 3-year grant that kind of bumped that high for us. So if you'll flip to the next slide for me, Rob. So now we're focusing on that blue slice in the prior chart, and this is just our general operating fund. And the funds come from 3 major places. The first one being local property taxes that represent the lion's share of our income, that are voted by our residents, and when in an election, excuse me, and that represents about 56% of 57%, excuse me. Can't see that little print over there. 57% of the general operating fund. Then the next largest pie chart is the green slices, and that comes from state. So the dark green slice comes from the state foundation formula, which has changed, and we're going to talk a little bit later in the changes of that and how that impacts the district. But you can see that the state does not fund us in a major way in our general operating funds. The light green represents property tax allocation reimbursement, which if you look on if you're a homeowner in Cincinnati, you look on your property tax bill, you will see 10% rollback or 2% owner-occupied tax credit. So you don't have to pay those taxes. The state's paying it on your behalf to the district. So they're reimbursing those credits to us. And then the other pie chart, the dark blue and the orange represent local funding. The majority of that dark blue is our Community Reinvestment Act a payment in lieu of taxes payments that we collect on abated properties, and then and our TIF district income. And then the orange represents prior period reimbursements for E-rate that we spend the money and then they reimburse us a couple years later. And so that goes into that little pie slot. And so that's just kind of the high level area of how we get our funding. Just to note that the property taxes, that big light blue slice, does not grow with enrollment. So it's based on property valuations and the millage that the Hamilton County auditor sets. And so when we're in a state of growing enrollment, our revenue doesn't keep up with the slope of the enrollment for us. And so that puts a bigger pressure on everything else. So for every property tax dollar we collect, it goes thinner with every new child that we get. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Superintendent Wright. She wants to talk about state and federal grants.
So one of the things that we heard Ms. Wagner share is that our grants are very restrictive. And so when we think about restrictive, that just simply means we get monies that are granted to us or given to us, but then we're told how we can spend the money, what we can spend the money on. We are monitored for what we can spend the money on. That comes from both state and federal grants. As you look at it, we'll go to the next slide, please. As we look at the slide that's coming up on the screen, this particular slide really shares with us our percentages. And if you're looking at it, you notice a couple of things. I'd like to call your attention to a couple of things. One, you see state, you see federal, and you also see Esser, and then there's a total. So that's one thing that I want to call your attention to. The next is you see something that says non-pub. That means non-public. So as with the grants that we receive, we have a responsibility to ensure that some of those grant funds are given to our non-public programs. So those are programs where we're serving our students or serving students of Cincinnati. They're not in our school district, but they're still students of Cincinnati that are in non-public schools. And so that portion of the money, based on the guidelines, goes to those non-public schools. And the rest comes to CPS for us to then determine how we're going to use that money. At the bottom of the screen, you see a terminology that says supplement versus supplant. And so with our grants, it's important that we recognize that with our grants are given to us. Most of the grants that we receive are given to us so that we can supplement what we're doing, which means we are already using money from our own budget to cover a particular item. As long as we continue to use money from our current budget to pay for that item, we can then do more. We can pay for more of the same item. But what we cannot do is remove money from that we're already using our general funding for and then use the money that we're getting from the grant instead of using the other funds. So when we think about supplement, we can use it to augment it, to make it better, to increase it, but we cannot supplant, which means remove the funding that we're already using and then use those dollars instead. We did receive some opportunity and a bit more leeway than we've had, and I've been in education now for almost 30 years. And in almost 30 years, this is an opportunity through Esser to be able to have a little more leeway than we've had in some other areas, but we still have to be cognizant of what we're doing in terms of supplementing and supplanting. As a district, when we break down our funds and think about pandemic support, so this slide shows to you as a district where we then put our monies for pandemic support that came from Esser funds and came from our other grant funds. So it breaks down, really, Esser broke down into 4 areas for us, and that's on the next slide. Rob, let's go ahead and go to that one. Esser broke down for us into 4 areas, and then we'll go back to the other. Response to COVID. And so anything that we're doing around COVID mitigation strategies, around looking at how we are going to reduce the spread of COVID, how we're looking at supporting students that have had experiences with COVID. So that was one of the areas that we could focus on as a result of Esser. The other is remote learning, because we know that during the heightened time of the pandemic, many of our students were learning at home or they were learning remotely. And so we could use Esser funds to then cover technology for those students, hotspots as necessary, and anything that was needed for teachers to ensure that they were then able to provide that remote learning for students. Prevent learning loss, and it's just what it says. What else are we doing to provide additional support to students because they've not had direct instruction in a period of time, or they've experienced COVID, and so therefore they're at home as well? What happens? What are we doing to give additional support, academic support to those students to prevent learning loss? So that was another category for where we could focus with Esser. And the last would be business continuity. As an organization, even though we had to close our doors often because of what we were working through in terms of COVID, as an organization, we could use funding to assist with the continuity of our business and our business strategies. And so those were the 4 areas as we think about the 4 buckets. For our purposes as an organization, and this is really the same thing you see on this first slide, it just has the first slide has the dollar figures on it. But some of the things that we did, we have a nurse in every building to provide support. We assigned building substitutes to schools so that there was additional support at the school building when we had teachers that had to be at home. Additional PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, for example, gloves, for example, hand sanitizer. Additional PPE and cleaning supplies were included in the things that we could do spends on with Esser, and we included that. Summer Scholars, so that was one of the programs that we have continued because that goes along with preventing learning loss and providing students additional support. The one-to-one devices for students and technologies for students and teachers, and facilities upgrades, especially as we're thinking about mitigation and how we are reducing the spread of COVID that happened throughout the community. And then a return to normal operations. We have gone from being full-time, fully face-to-face, to having about 2.5 years where we were face-to-face, and then we had to go back full-time, had to go back remote, and now coming back to face-to-face. And so really making sure that we are looking at what's happening with curriculum. What is the evidence-based curriculum that we're using with students? How are we providing transportation? I know that that's a popular word for us, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to you really soon with our next steps around transportation. But what are we doing through transportation, as well as our athletics and extracurricular activities? The one thing that I also want to call out here, and then we're going to go back to our treasurer who will talk to us about our state funding changes, but one of the things to call out here is something that we call in our world the Esser cliff, right? So that means that we have, that's on the next one, that means that we have an infusion of monies that have come, one more, right, okay. We have an infusion of monies that we have received from the federal government as a follow-up to COVID, to the pandemic. So we've gotten leeway to be able to use funding in those 4 buckets that I just talked about a moment ago, right? remote learning, providing additional supports to students around learning loss, business continuity, in the first one. The first one, I always leave that one off. Response to COVID, that's the one I always leave off. However, that is one-time money. So one-time money means that once we are granted that money, we don't get that money again. So even though we've been given the leeway and we've been given authorization to move certain items and pay for certain items with those funds go away. So what's really important is that there is an Esser cliff. And what that means is once those funds are still gone, the things that we've already put into place with those funds, we no longer have access to that because there is no money. The funds are already gone. And so when we think about where we are in terms of the cliff, I believe our last year is 2024 for the Esser funding. So our Esser funding that we've received runs out for us 2024. So we can't wait until 2024 to think about what we're going to do when we no longer have Esser funds. Now, there are ways that we increase our revenue, as our treasurer talked about. However, there is a lot of money that has been provided to the district at this point that is allowing us in many areas to maintain business continuity as well. And one of those areas of maintaining business continuity is keeping our staff employed in different areas. That's one of the primary areas because that's one of the biggest areas that we cover as an organization. It's actually the monies that we pay around staffing. So just want to make sure that we are clear. Esser has been a positive, has really been positive for our school district and school districts across the country, but it is not the end-all be-all because the money goes away. And when the money goes away as an organization, we still have to continue with the supports that we're providing and make tough decisions around what we can continue and what we can no longer continue to fund.
Slide, please. We talk a little bit about the state budget changes. So the state has a biennium budget. The new biennium budget kicked in July 1 of this year, and it's significantly different than our old formula. So the old formula was ruled unconstitutional 4 times, and the state was practicing what they call residual budgeting. So they would take their budget and they would figure out how much money they're going to put in transportation, services, whatever the state provides, and then whatever was left over was allocated to K-12 education. And they tried to spread it across 613 different school districts, which I think 90% of the school districts were not on the formula. So they were either on the guarantee, which means their enrollment was dropping, and they were guaranteeing a certain level of income, or they were on the cap, which we were growing, but they wouldn't let us grow faster than our students were growing faster than the formula would allow us to do. So they tried to come up with a new formula. This is very similar to the way we do our own school budgets. Where they try to figure out how much does it cost for a student to educate a student, and they came up with formulas. So whatever your projected enrollment is, and then how many staff kindergarten teachers you need, how many first grade teachers you need. But they're using a average salary across the state to fund that. That becomes your base funding, and it was either based on last year's enrollment or your average over the last 3 years, whichever was higher, because some of us had dropped a little bit during COVID, although we're responding. And then they added categoricals, so they're adding weighting to students with disabilities and the different types of disabilities, gifted, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students. The biggest challenge to this formula is that they couldn't fully fund it across the state. So it's hurting us financially in the first 2 years. But one of the biggest changes was they removed what they call pass-through funding. So, excuse me, all the students that go to attended community schools or Ed Choice vouchers or Peterson or autism scholarships, we would get the state revenue for those students, and then they would deduct off tuition from us. So we would get the revenue, but we'd also have the tuition expense. So this is a positive change for us because the tuition expense is higher than the revenue we receive for each child because we are considered a wealthy district. So in the old formula, we would get 46% on every dollar that the formula calculated. And so we would get 46%, but then we would pay out a full rate of tuition for those things. So the elimination of pass-through funding was a positive thing for us. It just makes financial reporting and trend analysis a little bit more difficult. And then the other major cost doing the categorical spending for us. So if you flip to the next slide. We became richer as a district and having done nothing economically different in the city of Cincinnati, because it's all relative to what happens in the rest of the state. We went from a 46% reimbursement to 43%. The student wellness funding was a surprise to us. So, you know, when DeWine went into office, he created the student wellness fund. It was an actual state grant. And the last year prior to this, we got $12 million. Well, they took student wellness and put it in the formula, so now it's subject to that state share. So instead of getting the full 12 million, we're only getting 3 million because it's reduced by our local share of funding. Now it's offset right now because they have this little line in there about transitional guarantee, but because they're only funding the formula in part, this year we're losing $49 million in revenue. So if they had fully funded our formula, we would get 49 million more this year and another 39 million next year. So over a biennium period, we're losing $88 million revenue that we could do a lot with our budget. We could hire a lot of teachers and a lot of curriculum to pay for that stuff if they had fully funded this. And so it's really subject to the next biennium and how much they're going to increase the funding for. Comparatively speaking, just so you know, our state share is 43%, Cleveland's is 69%, Akron's is 71%. Columbus is the only one that's lower than ours. Dayton's at 68%, and Toledo's at 70%. So all of our children economically are similar, but the funding for our children has a bigger burden on our local taxpayers than the other districts because they're getting the majority of their funding from the state. Does that make sense? Okay. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Moffitt, I believe.
Okay, so that was a lot. Take a breath, Jen, take a breath. That was a lot. But we want these town halls to be interactive and informative. And I know you have the answers. So what we want to do, we've got a panel of experts here who are able to answer questions from the audience in person and online. So we want you to put your questions in the chat. No matter what they are, we're going to get them answered. If you're in blue jeans, you can chat. You can come down to the podium if you have a question in person. You can raise your hand in blue jeans. If you have a question related to a spend side of the equation, you can submit them anyway, and then we'll make sure that they get addressed in the next one. I know Jen can answer these questions because she can break this down like to the 6th grade level because I got it a couple times. So to give everybody a chance to get organized, and I know you all have questions, so come on down with them. Send them up, raise your hands. But until everybody gets in place, I'm going to ask a question first. Can you talk about what does it mean to be a wealthy district, and how can we understand that Columbus, we have the same type of kids in the state, but Columbus is, did you say 71%? Cleveland. What does that mean that we have to pay 43% and they get to pay 71? What does that mean?
Good question. So it's based on a pretty complicated formula, of course, but it's a combination of property wealth, median income, and average income. And they have this very complex formula to figure it out. And then they rank the district. So if you're in the certain percentile, then you get X percent, and then they go from there. So less fun Cleveland because we have a lot of property wealth in the city of Cincinnati. We have a lot of large corporations and our property valuations. So what that says to the legislature is that we have the ability to raise our own money through property taxes, where a Cleveland can't because they don't have as much property wealth. So a millage to us, 1 mil on a tax levy is much more valuable to us than it is to Cleveland.
I know this one is a tough one. We don't have any questions yet, so this is a tough one. Can you explain the millage? I know that might not be a quick explanation, but what does that mean to people who are listening and like, well, what? Hang on, does it mean that Cincinnati just has I know we have a lot of corporations. We're a pretty big city. with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And we've got some nice, wealthy areas in our city. So what does the millage mean?
Formula that the county auditor uses, or actually statewide, and it's 1/1000th of a dollar. So when they calculate property values, if you have a home of $100,000 market value, they tax you on your assessed value, which is 35% of that, so $35,000. And then for every 1 mil, it's divided by $1,000. So if it's a 10 mil levy, then whatever that math is, I can't do it on the top of my head. I can't calculate it anymore. I have to use a calculator. But you take it, it's 1/1000th of a dollar. So I think Ms. Sellers would like to come to the podium. Is that correct?
Are you coming?
You have a question? You want to come? Yeah.
Come on. Well, we were waiting on you to come to the mic.
Before President Sellers
Face.
begins,
I'm the screaming
Julia,
face.
if I could just interject something about the wealthy piece of this, which is really shocking. Of all of the cities in the state of Ohio, Cincinnati rates among the top 2 for childhood poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a disconnect about being a wealthy district, but having such a high level of poverty for children and their families. So it is a very difficult line to kind of walk. But where I spent my time teaching, Wyoming is a wealthy district. Cincinnati is a wealthy district based upon property, but still this very high level. And actually, at least 4 years ago, I think we were in the top 5 nationwide for childhood poverty. So this is something that this is an incredible challenge and a very, very important responsibility that we have. But thank you for asking that about that wealthy district.
And one more
Hello.
time, Julie, before you do your questions, let me say one more thing. I know you may have
That's
several.
okay. Take your time.
I also want to acknowledge that we have partners that also support our work. And it's important that we recognize those partners. We have 22 partners, 22 school-based health centers, as well as 2 vision centers and 4 dental clinics that are provided by wonderful partnerships. And you're welcome to clap because that's amazing. So it is really important that we honor those that are also helping to support us in the work that we're doing for our students. Now, Julie, it's to you.
Okay. I have actually 2 parts to my question, but I first want to start out. I've been working on this for a really long time. And if you're driving around the city of Cincinnati, like you've been doing for the last 2 months, you see all this brand new construction everywhere. And it's almost all abated. And there were properties that were growth in value. So we're not really receiving, when you showed that one chart, it said how much money we're getting from the state because our property values are growing. Our property values are growing, but they are abated. And we're not really getting any additional funds for the houses for residential. But how much money on January 1st, 2020, right before the pandemic, City Council enacted additional TIF districts. And they wanted to capture the growth of property values. And they were very adamant it had to be done before they did the reevaluation of property taxes. With the loss of those dollars in those additional TIF districts, and I think it was either 13 or 16 additional districts, how much revenue have we lost from that? And how can we go about making sure that even though our property values are growing exponentially in this city, the school district is not seeing those dollars? And so really, I think that it's something that we really have to talk about. I believe it's highway robbery of the school system, and I would like to really go out there and work on this. City Council could do something within the city of Cincinnati that somehow we get a percentage of the abatements from residential, because right now the state says they don't have to provide that pilot payment. So there are several things. How much money have we lost due to the additional TIF districts that were created January 1st, 2020? And how can we go about lobbying the city so that we can get a pilot payment from all of the residentials. And they actually increased recently housing. If it's 6 or more, they are getting abatements for 30 years. That's longer than my lifetime that I have left.
So let me,
So
your
I know
first
those are
question-
complicated questions, but you know that that's where my passion has been.
Right.
And it really frustrates me that we're sitting here talking about not having enough dollars and asking, how are we going to pay for what we need when there are people not paying their fair share?
So you're correct that we don't have control over residential abatements. That's a state law.
But the city could do it.
The district receives about $45 million a year, about $36 million a year in a combination of abatement payments, pilot payments on corporate or commercial properties, excuse me, and then another $23 million on TIF district properties. The city collects that money and then pays us. And it's not just the city, it's all the cities that are inside of our boundaries, right? So they all have their TIF districts. Now, when the recent rule that they passed, when you raised that, the Finance Committee directed us to schedule a meeting with Greg Landsman is coordinating from the City Council side. You're invited. And so I've reached out to him a couple of times. We have a group of people that will be meeting together so they understand what their changes are and how it's going to impact the district, how we can go forward with that. But you do know that we have an agreement that it's a 5-year agreement around the abatements Community Reinvestment Acts, and whenever we start renegotiating that, we can certainly add the residential conversation to that table. But the meeting, I know that Greg, Councilman Landsman, is working on. As soon as we get communication on when that's going to be, we'll certainly invite you to that meeting.
Okay, because I've been promised that meeting for 3 years.
And the first question you asked me about how much money we've lost, I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know, but we'll certainly, we're planning to do a presentation at the next Finance Committee around our CRAs and our TIFs, and we'll see if we can include that for you.
And how is the state adjusting the payment to us based on what we're losing in abatements and TIFs?
They're not. What I was talking about was the tax credits are on homeowners' bills, the rollback and the 2.5%
Right.
owner occupied. The property value, when they do the wealth, they calculate the wealth, our 43% state share. Abated properties are not included in that value. So the city's argument about how they make us whole through that calculation used to be that back before 2012, but the formula changed that we're not made whole anymore. And so that's when the formula kicked in, the new formula kicked in, you saw we got wealthier, but it doesn't make sense.
But our dollars went down. We got wealthier, but our dollars went down.
Right. So the wealthier we get, the less money we get from the state. But if what you say is true, doesn't make sense. If so many more properties are abated than they're not included in the valuation, how could we be wealthier?
Mm-hmm.
It's relative to the rest of the state. So it's us compared to the average of the state is that calculation. And it's really not fair. Yeah.
It is not fair. And that's
Yes.
what I think as a community, we need to start really being loud about that,
Yes.
because it's not fair to our kids when we're talking about where we have to make cuts.
Yeah. Good point. Keep us on task, Julie. Thank you.
That's really, really significant. And I want to make sure that we encourage people to attend the Finance Committee meeting, which will be televised on Blue Jean and recorded, so that you can, if you can't make it at the time of the meeting, you can actually participate. Can you all hear me better now? Okay, I have to work on that, so I apologize. Attend the Finance Committee meeting so that you can hear the report, so that you can understand that's where the work happens, is in the committee meetings. So we've got the Finance Committee chair here. I want to ask a question that someone asked me yesterday, because they really don't understand how, if it has been deemed unconstitutional for the past 20 plus years, I think the anniversary of the 20 or 25th year was recently, that the way we fund our schools is unconstitutional. How is it that we have levies? How do we keep having levies? So can you explain that part? Because we saw that the district is funded by levies in the first slide. The percentage was like 57.9%. in property taxes. But it's been deemed unconstitutional to the point where we have a new school funding formula. Can you just explain a little bit about that, Jen?
But for Cincinnati Public Schools, when the state will only fund us at 43 or 41%, or 46 to 43%, we have to make up the rest of the revenues. We can't go out and sell more diapers. We can't go out and have a car sale campaign to raise more revenue to pay our bills. And so the way we have to do that, the only access we have to do it is with property tax levies. And that's the way the state of Ohio operates. Not all school districts, other states operate that way. Like North Carolina is based on income tax, I believe. I don't know how your other districts raise their revenue, income tax. So Ohio is kind of unique when it relies on property taxes. But that's why we're forced to go back to the public to say, you know, in our property taxes, half of our property taxes are called fixed sum levies, which means when they go on the ballot and the voters approve it, like the one that's coming up in November is $51.5 million. We get $51.5 million no matter what happens with property values up or down, or enrollment goes up and down, because they're not allowed to grow with inflation. So the voters approve $51.5 million. But as our enrollment grows, we still only have $51.5 million to support those children. So then we're always going back to, or having to go back to ask for more money.
But if I can also add, one of the questions that I know that has also come up is, you know, because we have Esser funds, is this the appropriate time to go back for a levy? And so one of the things that I would like to call our attention back to is the fact that Esser funds are one-time funds, and there is an Esser cliff. So it becomes, if I can use a colloquialism, it becomes a pay me now or pay me later, in that if we're using those funds to then cover additional costs, at some point in that 2-year period, those funds are gone, and then we still have needs that need to be addressed because we're still only at the 43%. And so, and 43% in terms of funding, so there is the need to make up the difference when it comes to overall funding and funding for our program. So Esser, we want to think about it because it's one-time funds. That money goes away, but we still have an organization that we need to move forward for our students.
To add to that, that the compliance department with the federal funds are becoming stricter and stricter about how districts use these funds. One example is early on, we used money to help repair a ventilation system. And they first denied that expense. And so I had to get on the phone and argue with them to say, I wouldn't be repairing or upgrading this ventilation system if we weren't in a pandemic situation, right? And so they finally relented, and they were able to approve that. But we can't just take the Esser funds and supplant what we're already doing with the general fund. And so that's why it's difficult, and why we're still relying on property taxes. So thank you. Question?
Yes, hello, my name is Ryan Mooney Bullock. I work at Green Umbrella, and I also am a parent in the district. And I work in the environmental sector, and so we've been paying a lot of attention to all the infrastructure dollars that are coming down the pike from the federal government. And so I'm curious if there's, like, what you all are paying attention to in terms of additional funding opportunities from the federal government. Who's in charge of tracking that? Like, what's the process look like?
Unfortunately, all the infrastructure dollars is not going to K-12 education at this time, where we were hoping for that. But we do have a grants department, and they monitor all state and federal grants that are come out. A lot of them are competitive, and we have to apply for them. But all that communication goes through them. And I get tons and tons of email, as the superintendent will, from the Ohio Department of Education. So every time a school has a new school emergency plan they need to update, I get that email. So on one day, I'll get 65 emails from ODE. But so we are monitoring that constantly and looking for it.
Awesome, thank you.
If I can also add there as well, it's important for us to also connect with, we are always looking for funding opportunities, and grants becomes one of those ways for us to look at additional funding. But a lot of those funds, of course, also come with restrictions, as we talked about earlier. So we want to continue to bring back to the forefront that when we are provided grants, we will take grant funding, especially our competitive grants, because we've earned those funds and it goes over a period of time once we receive the grant. but it is also very specific on how you can use it. And there's always the issue of supplementing and supplanting when we start thinking about federal and state dollars. So I want to add that as well.
And I'll give you an example of a challenge that the district has. And so a lot of our schools receive school improvement grants, and they use that money to hire data coaches, contract with data coaches. Well, it's a 2-year grant, and the grant goes away. They want to keep their data coach, but there's no funding source to replace that. So it becomes very, very difficult and choices about what's the priority of funding versus the grant that goes away.
So, Jen, do we have any more questions right now? So we've got this levy that's up, $51.5 million for its third renewal this November. The board's talking about putting it on the ballot, and we got our finance chair here too, so we're gonna ask her questions. How have we used this money over the years, and what would happen if we don't get that renewal? Because it's a renewal, so I want to also talk about a renewal versus what's the difference? It's a renewal, then there's another one.
You could do a renewal, you could do a substitute.
Right. So talk to us about what this is. What are we talking about, Finance Chair? What are we talking about putting on the ballot? And then what happens if we don't get it?
So, Rob, there's a slide that does the renewal levy, if you'll pop that up.
I just should just start with this renewal that is up, and hopefully the board will decide to put it on the ballot for the very reasons that it's $51.5 million annually, and hopefully for a 10-year period rather than a 5-year period. It first was on the ballot as new money, and I have a personal affection for it because it was the first year I was on the board. It was passed in 2008. It's been renewed twice for a 5-year period, and this would be its third renewal. And so it's more like, rather than we're putting it on the ballot, it's life expectancy. We can choose to extend its life expectancy into 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And I think what finance has decided is that we would like to do what we did the last time we renewed a 5-year levy, and that was extended for 10 years. The people in this town and throughout our district like to hold the board and the district, to the superintendent's point, accountable. And so that's why we did not decide to do it as a continuing, which then they don't get to vote again about it. We like being held accountable, but we also must have a decade, really, if we can get it, of fiscal and financial stability. So that's the reason it's kind of coming out. And we seldom ever say what would happen if, but I think this is important enough, especially with Esser expiring. People need to know the gravity of what this would mean, and I think the treasurer is able to talk to that. But I think also we want to be held accountable. We will need this money, and more particularly, we have a remarkable, of all the urbans in this state, we have a remarkable passage rate, and we thank the people that support us in that way. And really, very generous, and particularly in the preschool promise levy. That was a very generous thing for not only the district to be the taxing agent, but also for the community to see how important that was for our young people. So I'll let the treasurer, she does the bad news better than I do because she doesn't have to face re-election, but I would say I know it's operating money, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so let me answer the first question was how we used this money in 2008, and it really helped us kick off our My Tomorrow initiative, which we redesigned our high schools. The high school graduation requirements had changed, and we knew we couldn't continue to do high school the way we were doing it and get success. And so we, this former Superintendent Mitchell and a group of us got together to talk about how do we do things better. We started focusing on the students' tomorrow, so their future. So if they connected with their future, they connected with an adult in their adolescent years, and we exposed them to digital learning and helped them prepare for their future, then they would be much more successful in their next season of life, whichever the 3 E's, employment, enlistment, or enrollment in college. And so that helped us get that started. And so to answer your other question, for going from 5 to 10 years, so on a 5-year cycle, we had 3 renewal levies. It was like every 4 years we were renewing it. So public got confused. We all became levy fatigued. And so they thought they didn't understand that it was just renewing what was happening. And they always were thinking that you're always coming back to us for new money. And that wasn't the case. So we've been very frugal and good stewardship with our taxpayer dollars and stretching those dollars as far as we can. But with the cost of living and increase in enrollment and the loss of state funding, it's made it a challenge to fund our strategic initiatives that are working well, right? So what would happen if we don't pass it? These are just examples. I'm not threatening anything. I have no decision-making power in this, but just to put things in perspective so people understand how painful this might be. Because we operate, property taxes operate on a calendar year, if this doesn't pass, the first year we would lose half that funding, so $25.5 million, or $25 million. For us to cut $25 million out of our budget, we would have to close 9 small elementary schools, 2 big high schools, or lay off and unemploy 260 administrators and teachers, not just teachers. I'm not threatening, but I'm just trying to give you a perspective on how incredibly painful that is. 9 elementary schools would have to consolidate. And then in the next year, on top of that, not allowing any of that stuff to come back, we would have to cut all of our athletics and extracurriculars, as an example. We'd have to cut back on transportation, high school transportation, probably $5 million of that, and another high school and another elementary school. So we would go from 65 schools down to 50-ish. Yeah, I can't do math in my head anymore. So it would be very, very painful. It doesn't seem like a lot when we have a $600 million budget, but it's a lot, and it would be very harmful to students. So I put the election history up on this slide because I thought it was significant that the last time we went from a 5-year to a 10-year was probably one of our highest passing rates in a renewal levy. So and then the last one we did was the 2017, which was the one that supports preschool expansion, $15 million set aside, and that passed as a renewal at a very high rate as well. And so we were pleased for that. And the 2 actions that the board has to take in order to get this on the ballot is there's 2 resolutions. The first one has to happen 100 days prior to election day, which is November 6th. I looked it up today. And that declares the need to do the levy. And then that goes to the Hamilton County Auditor. He calculates the millage rate, certifies the ballot language. It comes back. The board adopts that in a public resolution. And then our legal counsel, Dan Hoying, and I run it up to the Board of Elections, and then they give us an issue number. And then we go start preparing. So,
Just one more point of clarification. The levy, it goes on the ballot. When would it be effective? In January? Or is there like a cycle that it goes on the ballot, but we can put it on the ballot a couple more times before it becomes effective?
Right. So we don't start losing revenue until the next fiscal year. We'll have another opportunity in the next spring, but I cannot certify a budget without that renewal. So you remember on the 5-year forecast that I have to file twice a year, if a renewal doesn't pass, I have to take that out of the forecast, and so then I can't certify a budget. So we have to make the cuts, even though we're going to put it back on the ballot.
And we cannot just, to the superintendent's point, supplant Esser funds to say, hey, I saw $300 million on there. We cannot just put that $52 million loss from Esser onto our budget, right?
And so I don't mean this to come out and threatening at all, but should it not pass and we have to revise our revenues downward, our 5-year forecast will show us going into a cash deficit within that 3-year window. So there's a rule on the general fund forecast that says we have to show positive cash balances for the current year and then the next 2 years. And if you show a deficit within those 3 years, you have to come up with a cut plan. And if they don't like your cut plan, they start sending ODE staff members down here to take our financial decision making away from us. So we don't want that to happen because we want local control. And it's a long time coming, but that's kind of the process that the state uses when districts get in financial trouble.
So we don't want the men in black to come down here and actually start messing with our books. We really want to. So really the key, we're starting this process to engage the community, to educate the community so that you all understand why we need what we're asking for, and get all your questions answered so that it's a definite yes on election day.
The treasurer mentioned the issue of her being able to certify a budget. If she can't certify a budget and sign on the bottom line, we can't pass it. That's it. Plus, if you do have that decrease, if you wait too long and then you lose the chance to have it pass, then you are talking about state takeover. I mean, one of the reasons Cleveland, very frankly, gets so much money is that the state took them over. And that was a decade or so ago. So knowing our folks here and knowing generally in this region that accountability issue and the glory of local review, local control, local review, and local accountability, we want to keep control of our own schools. And the way to do that is for the generosity of the taxpayers after we make the case. And I don't know, Jen, one thing, how many times do we have external audits on an annual basis? Not because we're bad, but because there's so many issues.
So typically we have somewhere between 8 and 14 external audits on finances every year. And so because we're a big district and there's a lot of money, the audit reach their quotas. The auditors reach their quotas by hitting us a lot. And so we do, and we've had excellent audits. And the last audit, there was not one management letter comment. It was a very clean audit. And then on occasion, and when I first became the treasurer, the Cincinnati Business Committee came in and audited our books, our forecasts, and went through all kinds of history to make sure that we were being good stewards, and we really did need the money that we thought we needed. And so it came out as a very positive. They made a couple recommendations to us, but for the most part, they said we were doing a good job with our finances, and so that was very encouraging to the public.
I don't think it's. Are there any questions on the chat, Rob? No? Does anyone else have any other questions? I know you got some burning questions. We can't hear you. I'm just going to put you on the mic so we can hear you better.
This is the first time that I've been in one of your meetings, so thanks for the opportunity.
Lift that up just a
You
little
were, there was $16 million or something that came in, and $9 million of it went to non-public. Tell me, so we're paying for students that aren't even a part of the system to go elsewhere?
bit. Can you put that slide back up, Rob?
And more, and it totaled more than what was coming into the system to help those students who are in the system.
Yeah, so that was the old formula. The new formula doesn't do that anymore. But we used to receive revenues on every Cincinnati student resident. And then wherever they went to school, that's where the money went. So with the community schools or public schools, they would take this state payment with them. But because we're considered a wealthy district, it's formulaic. So we would get 43 cents on the dollar, but they would take the full rate of the student to go to tuition. And that's why it was harmful to us. One of the reasons why they changed that formula was because so many public school districts claimed to say it was inequitable. And they were in effect taking our local property taxes with them.
Okay, so what's the present system? Present system, are we still paying for those non-public students?
So
or?
no, so there's two things. So that situation, the state pays the charter schools directly now. It doesn't come through us anymore.
Okay, good.
The other money that goes through non-public to serve students that are attending there for specific services that they need is we are the fiscal agent of those funds. So we send that to, we have a department that manages that, that's auxiliary. So those are students that qualify for specific services for special needs, or they need extra reading intervention. I can't think of any other examples right now. Is that okay? So transportation, right. And so yes, we are responsible we're transporting all students that qualify for transportation to whether they go to school, community school, or non-public. I think we spend about $6 or $7 million a year transporting non-CPS students.
Okay, and our students are having a difficult time in being transported themselves in the system.
Well, unfortunately, there's a national driver shortage everywhere, and so that's difficult.
But we're still providing transportation for those students.
Yes, we are required by
And
state
are
law.
they experiencing the same hardship as our students are?
Yeah.
Are they? Because I'm sure they're taken care of. I see them being bused, but I see our children struggling trying to get to school and getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be at a school that's clear across town. It's going to take them an hour and a half to be transported from here to there. But these students are being taken care of.
Well, they're experiencing the same experience that we're having. And I know that there's a group that went through an optimization study to better route the district. And the board has given the transportation department some more guidelines on specifically how many minutes a child can be on a bus. The state has a new rule that you can only transfer one time on Metro, right? Isn't that what it was? So there are new guidelines because everybody realized that that was not the optimum way to transport students. And so I think you'll see significant improvements this year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Are you my new parent advisor?
Yes.
Oh, it was so nice to meet you. We just talked on the phone a couple days ago. Thank you for coming.
And if I could also add for you, Dad, as you're a part of our new parent advisors, one of the things that our team does, because we do have to oversee what's happening with transportation for the students that are going to non-publics, we really are working more specifically with them for this year, while we're first thinking about how we're transporting our students and making sure that the recommendations that we've provided to the board from the study, that those recommendations, the board has an opportunity to vet those and make a decision so that we can share that with the community for our students. We met just yesterday with our non-public schools as well, so that they are held to the same standards of expectation as our schools are held to. So as we're talking about start times, there are some things that we have to normalize, and we know that we have a requirement by the state to provide transportation, but we also need them to follow our guidance so that we make sure that the students are getting what they need as we're working with our own students as well. So thank you for raising that, and it is something that we're addressing as a district.
We have plenty of ideas. First and foremost, be sure to come to our second town hall at the end of May, and there we'll be talking about expenditures and getting your priorities and ideas. Also, what we've talked about a lot of Esser, we're very fortunate that the administration and the board have talked a bit more about the ideas that we approach that Esser cliff, and we've been planning very carefully. A lot of the Esser funds are going to be up for review and repurposing because, as everyone knows, conditions have changed since we first initially started the planning. So I think you can impact us there as to how we expansively and correctly define how to use these Esser plans in these next 2 years. So that would be very, very helpful. But most particularly, help us prioritize the expenditures as we get ready for a new strategic plan, our new superintendent, and indeed a new budget process. So thanks so much.
So Rob, can you bring up the next slide, the next step slide? Yeah, I was trying to get his attention. So you want to?
So as we continue with our overall focus on engagement, as many of you know, yesterday we launched a survey around your feedback as we are starting our work and our work together. On the slide that you see on the screen, there is a QR code that's there. The survey that you received yesterday, it went to all of our school community, so all of our parents, all of our staff. On that same survey, at the bottom of that survey, there is a question for you to answer budget priorities, for you to give us a response on the top 3 priorities that you would like to see in terms of this budget cycle. And so these are areas that we're looking at as we're really thinking about how we are getting to a balanced budget to present to our board. it is important that we do get your feedback, because there are some areas that we're really going to have to look at and how we address those, and we want to do that with your voice. With the support of our finance chair as well as our board, our treasurer and I have already talked about moving into next year, hopefully having that at the beginning of the budget season versus at the end, so that at the beginning of the season we really can get that survey out there to start with, so that as we begin to think about the budget, we're doing that with your priorities in mind. So please take a moment. There's one question on that part of the survey. If you scroll all the way down, if that's the only one you want to respond to, that's just fine. There's one question there, and it's your top 3 priorities. And if you will complete that for us, that gives us more information to work with our finance committee, our finance chair, to work with the board as we're looking at recommendations for moving forward.
For closing out this first, I think, historic effort on our part, and really appreciate those that have been viewing this, participating, and most particularly want to thank all staff members and community members and partners that have participated thus far in the development of this budget, and know that we can count on you to continue so that it is an excellent and meaningful budget for our kids and for our community. So thanks, and remember, May 31st is the day, 5 o'clock again, and by all means, keep communicating with us in whatever form you choose. Thank you and goodbye.